What is up, everybody? Star Wars Dad back for another video. Today we're going to do something a little different. I kind of just want to talk about the state of the meta and kind of where everything is at and my thoughts on it. So, of course, we're going to talk about the best decks and then some decks I think that are on the fringe of being really strong and have the potential to win some big tournaments, and then some decks that are potential sleepers. So, of course, we have to start with this deck. This was a recent list. I think it was from one of the KOTD members that they piloted to a 6-1 record. And this is easily the best Sabine Green deck that I have played against. As I've been playtesting some other decks and trying to do some other videos, this deck is incredibly hard to beat. I mean, it was only a matter of time before this list got refined into a place where it's just like ridiculously strong. And what it does, unfortunately, is it really narrows the decks, the diversity that we had in set one with decks that were viable. It really narrows them down. And I can't really put my finger on what card is the worst. But I mean, in a nutshell, it's like, it's a lot of cheap units coming at you, and then you have Rebel Assault, Metal Ceremony to pump those units up. You have Red 3 to pump those units up. You have Fighters for Freedom to have reach with your red units. You have the Dark Saber at any time on any of the ground units to put a big threat on the ground unless your opponent has upgrade removal immediately. The Dark Saber also makes regular removal less effective because you really have to have like either Fell the Dragon or Rival's Fall to deal with it. It's just really, like I said, it really narrows what you can play, and it really kind of, this is what happens in a card game though. So right now I would say this is kind of like dictating, this deck in itself is dictating a lot of what we can play in the format, because if you can't beat this consistently, then you can't play that deck. So for instance, for example, I just recently was trying to do a video on Palpatine Blue. It's a deck that I haven't really messed with too much because it's always had a poor aggro matchup. I did like some of the new cards, and I've already play tested Iden Green and Qi'ra Green, which I think are strong decks. But Palp Blue just doesn't have what it takes. Like, you have to put way too much life gain stuff in there, and it kind of takes away from the core of the deck and what the deck wants to do. So I just don't think it's playable. So this deck, this is, like I said, this is the best list I've seen yet of this deck. I'm personally not going to be playing this deck on any videos because you know what it does. We already know it's like the best deck in the format at this point. I'm not a big fan of playing the best deck in the format. I've always been opposed to that. I just think it's kind of takes away the fun for me personally. I like more of a challenge. I like to play, decks that are competitive that can beat this deck, but and decks that can win for sure. Absolutely. I'm very competitive, but I just don't want to play this deck. It's not my style. But yeah, so if you can't beat this deck with what you're playing, then just be okay with losing, I guess, and just having fun, because that's what's going to happen. Because you're going to see this deck a lot. A lot of these cards are really cheap. Dark Saber, I think, and Poe are the most expensive cards. Either way, you're going to see variations of this deck. I do think that Dark Saber and Poe and Wrecker are and K2SO really. K2SO is extremely annoying and difficult, especially with Heroic Sacrifice, with Rebel Assault. It's just it does exactly what it wants to do. Just does the same things just about every game. The 3 Dark Sabers really do make this deck extremely hard. It makes it really hard to play a 25 HP base unless you just have the exact tools to deal with this deck, because it's very easy for this deck to get to 25 damage on you. So yeah, you got to be prepared for this. The decks that I think that do decent against this deck, I think Qi'ra and Iden Green do fairly decent. I do think that this particular version, though, like I said, is harder. I think Han Blue does okay, but again, you really have to have the top targets and things like that to deal with this. You have to have additional ways to gain life, or you're just going to lose if you don't find the right removal piece at the right time, or if you find a takedown but they have a Dark Saber and then it does nothing. So it's there's a lot of that kind of thing. I do think Fell the Dragon becomes better, but not you know, at the same time, if they put the Darksaber on Sabine, Fel the Dragon does nothing. So that's kind of what happens, is like if they put you in this situation where like at 4 resources, the best thing they could do is put the Darksaber on Sabine, you know. So it's just tough. I think Iden Blue, I don't even know if it's I don't even know if a hard control deck can keep up with this deck right now like that, because they don't have like, you know, Super Laser Blast is 8 resources, and yeah, they have ways to gain life and removal and things like that with Iden, but I don't know. I have to test that out more, but when I've been testing out against this particular version, like I said, it's just been really, really difficult. I think most likely, you know, going forward, I will be playing a lot of 30 HP bases, and even that can be really hard because of Darksaber. Like a Darksaber on a K2SO or a Darksaber on a Wrecker or a Poe is just bonkers. Like you have to have a Rival's Fall or a Fel the Dragon, and you know, if you're not playing blue, how are you dealing with that? You're just not. You're losing. So, I mean, you really have to strongly consider playing Confiscate. You have to strongly consider playing like Ketsu Anyo or Upgrade Removal or Aggression. You really have to have something that answers that card. And like I said, that like narrows how you deck build, because you have to consider all those cards to be able to deal with these types of situations with this deck. So it's just, that's kind of where things are at. So I don't have a good answer for you on how to beat this deck consistently. I think that, you know, Iden Green and Qi'ra Green have a chance, but I don't know. Like I said, it narrows things. Boba Yellow can tempo them. I think that's reasonable. A reasonable way to beat them for sure. I'm not sure Boba Green Boba Green's kind of in an identity crisis right now, trying to figure out how to get itself back to the top tier. I think it's kind of like on the edge. It's trying to figure out how to adjust to this Darksaber. It's really Darksaber and Poe and Wrecker. It's just that really took this deck to a whole another level. So, anyways, yeah, wish I had a better answer for you, but I think we will have to see in coming weeks how other players try to figure out how to tackle this deck. But like I said, it really does narrow what you can play. You have to be able to beat this deck, or else you're just not going to do well in a tournament. Number 2, Boba Yellow. Very strong, you know, cunning new adventure, Fett's Fire Spray. The cunning play on Toro Calican is awesome. The Hotshot Blaster is awesome. This particular list was one of the ones that won Gen Con. It doesn't have the Boba Fett's armor in it, but I do think the Boba Fett's armor is very strong as well. Kind of similar to the Darksaber, and it puts you in weird places if you're playing other forms of removal where it's harder to remove the Boba Fett, or even with a ground unit Boba Fett, because it just says damage. It doesn't say from attacks, so you can't even like damage them as much. Like a Force Choke's only doing 3 damage, or a Open Fire's only doing 2 damage. So this deck definitely got stronger as well. They do have the ambush tools to fight against Sabine. They do have the tempo plays with the No Good To Me Deads, the waylays, and the cunnings, which is all very, very strong. You're going to have to play against this deck. This is one of the best decks in the format. This was the best deck by the end of set 1, and really I could tell from the beginning of set 1 when I first started doing videos on this game, like this deck was really, really strong, and it was my favorite deck to begin with because it wasn't being talked about as much. Now, not so much. I don't really want to play it. It's being the same thing with Sabine. I really just don't want to play the decks that are being played the most. It's not really fun for me. I don't really enjoy like playing mirror matches all the time. I kind of takes the fun out of playing, I guess, for me personally. So, but another one that you're gonna have to be really prepared for. The cunning on Toro Calican is disgusting. Like where they get to pump it up for 4, make it a 7/5, and then play a bounty hunter, do a damage to Calican, and you know, play like a Greedo, for example, do a damage to Calican, and then you can attack with it again for 7 more damage, which is a really strong play. So make sure when you're playing against this deck that you're dealing with Calican so that it can't attack you twice if they have the cunning play and they try to get that off. It's really strong to do 14 damage with 1 unit in 1 turn. I mean, this is a tough one. I think Han Blue has a solid matchup because of the hand disruption. I think hand disruption in general does well as long as you have ways to deal with their units too, which Han Blue does. I do think the soft control decks have a fairly decent matchup. I mean, again, Boba Cunning has answers for control as well, so those matchups are close. I think it really depends on the player and the pilot, and just luck of the draw as well. Palpatine decks have a pretty solid matchup against this deck. When I was testing even Palpatine Blue, I beat this deck pretty well. And then even the Han Blue video I just did, I beat this deck pretty well, pretty handily. I think actually I beat them 33-0 in one of the games. So it's definitely beatable, but it is still very, very good, and a very good Boba Yellow player. This deck is incredible. So another one you're going to have to be prepared for. Game plan to make sure that you can beat this consistently, or you're not going to have a fun day. Number 3 is Qi'ra Green. This is very similar to Wu's list where he won Gen Con. Wu is, great player and really has a very strong understanding of the game. Same with all the KOTD guys from the first deck, with the Sabine deck. And I think he's even part of KOTD. I don't know. I don't keep up with everything, but this is a very good deck. I did a video on this recently as well. Before Gen Con, this deck was very strong in testing. I do think that particular Sabine version that I just showed, I think is going to be very difficult for this deck because of how much damage they're pushing on you. I know if I was playing Qi'ra Green, I would not want to play against that Sabine deck. It's just really strong. I think that matchup is really, really going to go one way or the other very quickly. I feel like we're going to see a lot more Sabine Green winning things soon. I think that's just around the corner. What do I like about this deck? I like that this deck has Overwhelming Barrage, which I think is one of the best cards in the game. It has Vigilance, one of the best cards in the game. It has Vader, a very strong card. It has Vader with Death Trooper, which helps you hit for 7 damage. Snoke, Avenger, Maul. It has so many fun cards. This is one of my favorite decks to play. It's probably one of the decks that I would feel most confident taking to a tournament because it does have well-rounded matchups. You do have the 3 top target that you're bringing in against the Sabine matchup. And you're taking out, for that, you would take out probably Avenger and Laser Blast, I would imagine. Maybe keep 1 Laser Blast, take out the 2 Avengers, and take out cards that are not helpful. The Resupply. Resupply is actually pretty solid, though, against them because you want Qi'ra to flip on the same turn that Sabine does. I think that's a really strong... Especially, I think I would let go of 1 Resupply and the 2 Avenger probably for the 3 top target. Just because Laser Tech ECL is actually really good because it's a way to, on turn 2, to kind of get yourself ready to flip Qi'ra and play Barrage on the same turn, which is ideal for Qi'ra. So, but very strong deck. Good matchups across the board. You have Relentless and Devastator and Palpatine's Return on the sideboard for control. Again, I wouldn't want to play against Sabine with this deck, but this is still one of the decks that I would feel most confident playing against that deck. Another awesome one. This deck won one day at Gen Con, and I think the week before Gen Con I had won 2 tournaments with the same guy. I did a video on this one as well recently. It's really, really strong. It's really fun to play. It's also very difficult to play. I don't think you'll see as much of it because of how difficult it is to play, because you really have to have a ton of reps of playing against Sabine and decks like that and understanding how to win that matchup for it to be successful. I think there's going to be a select few players that continue to be successful with this deck, but I think beating that Sabine Green list is going to be hard. I think we're going to see less Boba Green now, which I think is probably a more favorable matchup for this deck in recent tournaments, whereas I think the Sabine list that we just talked about is going to be pretty difficult. So, you're probably going to see, I do think that this deck does well against the control decks. So I think these 4 decks are really, really in a great place. There are going to be a lot of these 4 decks. Again, this one I think you won't see as much because it's a harder deck to pilot. Han in general is one of the hardest leaders to pilot. You have to be a really great player, and you have to have a ton of reps with this deck to be really strong with it. It is a really fun deck to play, though, and I do suggest you give it a shot. I mean, Tech and DJ, stealing their resources, it's just a ton of fun. Ambushing in things, using Qi'ra to prevent them from playing, things on curve. It's really sweet. I think it has a strong control matchup as well, so you will be seeing this one some as well. Next on the list, and this one I think is just like right on the fringe of the top decks. I think it is very close to being one of the best decks. I think it has some good matchups. Like I think Boba Yellow and Boba Green decks it has a good matchup against. I think Sabine is going to be difficult regardless, but I think that this deck has strong answers. I mean, it has subtle life gain, has traitorous sentinels, and good sentinels. The life gain with Salacious Crumb, the Colonel Yularen. I said it correctly. The Emperor's Royal Guard is a really strong sentinel, the Dark Trooper, the Sunfighter, and then we have Barrage and Traitorous and Command. I mean, this deck has answers. The Siege and Short Trooper, as I've spoke about, this deck. That's this card's home is in this deck, where it just gets stronger and stronger, and it becomes a really, really strong answer as the game goes on, like pumping it up. This is a deck that I would consider playing as well, just because I really love Palpatine decks. I've really enjoyed Palpatine Green. I think Command's an amazing card. You really do want to ramp in this deck. It has answers for Han Yellow as well, with Scanning Officer and Palpatine in general, and Confiscate. So, very strong deck, very well-rounded. I do think that this takes a good amount of reps as well to be successful. It's not just a deck you're just going to walk in and just dominate unless you're a very good player. But this is definitely one I would consider right up there with Qi'ra Green for decks that I would play in a tournament. Next on the list is Han Blue. This is a deck I just did a video on. This deck is a ton of fun. But what I will say is that you do really need the top targets that are in the sideboard here. The Sabine matchup is extremely difficult. It's just, we have built-in life gain. I think in my video I was exploring the idea of using Avenger, but I think you have good answers for control with Force Throw and Pillage and early pressure and even Vigilance. So I almost think that the Avenger is not worth it because it's so expensive, and then because aggro is such a common opponent that you're going to be running into it so much that you really want to have as many ways to gain life as possible. Like I said, it really, that deck is really starting to narrow what you can play. You have to have built-in life gain everywhere if you're not playing Sabine, or an aggro deck like Boba Yellow as well. This deck is so much fun though. Cheating units in. Again, I don't play Karabast in my particular version. I like just having 3 copies of Open Fire and Takedown to deal with threats and play more of a control style. That fits more of my play style. I think there's other styles where they don't play as many removal units and play more units themselves, or removal spells, I'm sorry. Fell the Dragon and Rival's Fall are very important in this deck as well, so that you have a way to deal with those Darksabers, and then Poe is a way to deal with Darksaber. Rival's Fall is also a way to deal with Boba Fett's armor. So just, another strong deck. The hand disruption with the cheating in of units and just, playing a bunch of big payoffs is really fun. And that's what I enjoy about Han the Leader. I think Han the Leader has a lot of potential. I think that this deck could go far. I think it could absolutely win a tournament with the right pilot and the right 60 cards. I think it does require a lot of testing to get the right 60 cards. Tech is really sweet in here. It really helps you with your control matchups, and even if you're able to survive mid-game against Sabine. But definitely one you should give a shot if you enjoy playing Luke. I love playing Luke. But again, I'm going to be posting all these decks in the description below. But yeah, this is a strong one. Definitely, get your playtesting in with this one if you don't want to be playing Sabine or Boba Yellow. Against Boba Yellow, I mean, you're you're going to want to use hand disruption and then trade units early on, play defense. You know, use your ability to cheat units in is always going to be your advantage in with the Han leader. And then force throw and pillage when you can, gain life with Kanan and Yoda and Luke. Luke's going to be really powerful. Luke can take out a Fett's Fire Spray by itself. So just a really fun deck. And then Qi'ra Dragon, of course, is the closer in this one for a Boba Yellow deck. The next one, I think we're kind of getting into decks that are on the fringe. I think this deck has a lot of potential. I have messed around with this deck a lot. I do think that version of Sabine that from this video, I think is the most difficult aggro deck that this deck has played against, and it does give this deck a hard time. I have not played against that particular Sabine version in person with this deck. I did add in the Smuggler's Aid because of how aggressive the format is. I do think it's fine to play 51 cards in here and kind of figure out where you want to cut a card eventually. I do that with a lot of lists. I think it's honestly good practice for me because I'm squeezing in that extra card, and then once I figure out and determine which card needs to go, which right now, if I were to cut the card, it would be the second laser tech. I just put it down to 1 because it's very situational when I need it. And it gets sideboarded out against aggro. And aggro is, the premier deck in the format. I think against aggro, I'm probably taking out laser tech and potentially even tech. And probably bringing in Fell the Dragon and home 1s, and I'm taking out Qi'ra Dragon. So that's 5 cards. I'm bringing in Fell the Dragon and home 1. So home 1 gives me another form of life gain later in the game if I make it that far. Fell the Dragon gives me a 6 resource piece of removal. The difference between this deck and Han Blue is that we have ECL and Timely Intervention, which is a form of removal, and we're using our units to play defense against Sabine early on. We're using Timely to hit things before they get a Dark Saber on them, so we really, really want to pay attention to what's on the ground and make sure if we don't remove it, that we get it very close to dying so that we can remove it quickly. Obviously one of the disadvantages is that we are playing the 25 HP base so that we can ECL. ECLing in Poe a turn early is really sweet, especially if we do the Gunslinger combo with Spark of Hope on turn 1. Yes, that does work. Wrecker is also very, very strong to ECL, especially if we're able to get it out a turn or 2 early. Like if we do pull off the Reckless Gunslinger Spark of Hope play, and we can turn 2 resupply into Wrecker on turn 3 for ECL, that's actually really, really strong, and a really, really strong way to just win the game, just take over the game before they even get started. A Wrecker on turn 3 is just really hard for them to beat. So there's ways that this deck can be good, and that's why you have to be careful against aggro to not take out too much of your ability to cheat things in, because that's what makes this deck awesome. I mean, obviously the ambush cards and the Sentinels, they help, but again, that deck is just really hard. The Smuggler's Aid, I think, is necessary, unfortunately. Again, that's not a card I would even play if Sabine wasn't so ridiculously strong now. And again, you can tell every single deck we're talking about Sabine, so that lets you know that it's the best deck in the format and where we're at. Iden Green. Iden Green, I think, is similar to Qi'ra Green. Obviously, the flip turn is not as strong, but the subtle life gain does make a difference. We're playing a lot of the same cards. It has the potential to be strong. I think it's right there on the fringe. I think, again, it's about the pilot and it's about the right 60 cards. So you really gotta play test that matchup against that very specific Sabine version and see if you can consistently beat it. Very similar to Qi'ra Green with the cards you're using here. The difference is you're playing Phased Dark Trooper instead of Lom Pike, at least for me. You could argue that Lom Pike is still worth playing. That's really more of a playstyle thing, I think. I mean, adding shields is awesome, but Lom Pike specifically goes good with Qi'ra because you're already putting on shields on things. consistently. So, and that's one of the, that is obviously one of the reasons that Qi'ra, I would say, is one of the best decks where Iden Green is kind of on the fringe. It's because of the shields with Qi'ra and the flip turn. I mean, the shields are really, really strong mechanic as a way to deal with aggro decks, especially when you have sentinels that have shields. So, and basically they're wasting an action to attack into a shield, which gives you another turn to survive. So that's huge when you're playing decks that have big payoffs and, really strong ways to take over the game as the game goes on. So that's my thoughts, but I definitely like this deck. I think it's on the fringe, like it has potential. Bossk Green. This is a fun deck. I really like this deck. It does have the ability to have explosive turns early in the game, which allows you to take over the board state and kind of outpace Sabine in a way. And because you flip into Bossk in the same turn, and then you overwhelming barrage, kind of like how Qi'ra does with that, with the the laser tech ramp into barrage with Bossk is really, really effective. You'll notice that I'm not playing Kylo's TIE Silencer, and I'm playing the TIE Fighter in my list. And that is because I like to play TIE Fighter plus Bounty Hunter's Quarry on the first turn. I like to have the ability to play multiple things on turn one. Or play a TIE Fighter and a Stolen Land Speeder and a Guild Target, or, it just gives me the option to squeeze that unit in. And it also just, I'm playing more low to the ground. IG-11 is amazing in here. That is an incredible way to deal with Sabine. The on-attack trigger is really, really strong, especially because we have Timely and ECL. So there's going to be units that are damaged that we can just remove with the on-attack ability while we're attacking into something else. So it can really do a good job of killing two things and helping us get back in the game. It's a great ECL play if we haven't used ECL already as a way to deal with Sabine. This deck's a lot of fun, though. I think it has a lot of potential. Again, tweaking the right 60. You'll notice that we also play the Client. The Client is a great card to find with Vader, or even early on with Bounty Hunter's Quarry as a way to cheat it in and avoid the cost. You're definitely not playing it at 5 cost. It also gives you an ability that you can use consistently for a bounty for Bossk's ability. One crazy cool thing is if Bossk is out and you have a bounty of Client activated and you are able to kill that unit, then you get to gain 10 life, which is amazing. Bossk is a really cool leader, and I think it has a lot of potential. I also play Traitorous, which I'm not sure I've seen that being played. I almost think that I need to have a 3rd copy of Traitorous in the sideboard. It's a really good card to help us with, with gaining card advantage with like Bounty Hunter's Quarry and our bounty effects, especially if we're able to trigger Bounty Hunter's Quarry twice with Bossk out, and then playing into a Traitorous. It really just kind of take over the board state, and just, that's a really strong way of dealing with Sabine. And also Traitorous steals a unit that has a Darksaber if it's 3 or less resources, which happens often. So I originally had 3 Traitors in the main board, but I really wanted to have a strong ECL target at 5 resources with the IG-11. So that's where I cut the Traitors. But I do think you should probably put one in. If I was going to put one in, possibly for one of the Palps returns. I also like Pillage in the side as a way to deal with Control. Control is one of your bigger weaknesses with this deck. But this deck, again, has a lot of potential. I think you could see somebody win with this deck. It's one of those decks that's right on the fringe, and somebody who has, played this deck a lot could get the right 60 cards and find a way to take this deck to the top. Force Choke is also a really good answer when Sabine comes out. Bounty Hunter's Quarry is just such a good card. And having that combined with Vader is just really awesome. To have 2 different ways of getting cheap 3 resource units out. I also like having the 1-drops with Vader's ability so that you could literally get TIE Fighter, Dengar, multiples of those, or even get a Land Speeder if you have a way to immediately kill it. Also, on turn 1, it's so cool in this deck. You play a Dengar, then play a Land Speeder, and then play a Guild Target and Dengar does one damage to it, and then you use Boss ability and you immediately kill it. On turn 1, you can have a 2/2 and a 4/3, which is crazy. So there's some really cool plays in here. Another cool play is just like if they have a 2 HP unit out on turn 1, you play Dengar into Bounty Hunter's Quarry. And if you had the kill target too, you could even kill something with 3 HP, because each time you play a bounty, or an upgrade, I'm sorry, Dengar does 1 damage to a unit. So you could actually do 3 damage to a unit, get a free unit on board with the Bounty Hunter's Quarry on turn 1. So some really cool things you can do with this deck and really pop off. Boba Green. This deck, I think, is on the fringe. I think I've seen a lot of people using the 30 HP base because of Sabine just having Wrecker and Poe and Darksaber. It's kind of put this deck on the back burner. I'm not sure the best way to play this deck currently. I have not tested this out a lot. I've kind of been off this deck again because, you know, it was one of the most popular decks set 1, so I've kind of just stayed away from it a little bit. But I also have stayed away from it recently just because I don't think it has the tools necessarily like Boba Yellow does. You know, the price on your head play with Super Laser Tech to ECL into the Boba Fett leader on turn 2 is pretty sweet, and that's why I have that in my particular version. So you play price on your head on turn 1, turn 2 you ECL with Laser Tech, and you can pull out the leader on turn 2, which is crazy. And just, I think that's one thing that I think that this deck has going for it, if you can pull off that combo. As far as like which cards to play, this is a version that I had made a while ago. It doesn't have a Toro Calican in here, but again, you're not playing Cunning, so you know, I like the Consortium as a subtle way to gain life, which I think is probably necessary to play this deck. The 1 copy resupplies for like more control builds. The shoot first, I think, are pretty important against aggro, and I think that's a great card to bring in against them. You're probably, I don't even know. I mean, the 3 Syndicate Lackeys are really important as a way to deal with Sabine if you're able to ramp in a turn early with a price on your head or a Laser Tech. So I definitely think it has potential, but I do think it's kind of still gelling. I don't know, Sabine kind of sets the pace, and then everything else follows suits and figures it out. So we'll see. I'm interested to see the next big tournament, like what decks pop up or what decks rise to the occasion to deal with Sabine. But yeah, still a very strong deck though. Not much to say about it. Can't really think of much else to say. Waylay is still a really strong card early on against a deck like Sabine. You might have a reason to play Trader's main board against them, or even play another way to gain life against them. So something else to consider, I guess. Iden Blue is a deck that I think this is my more standard version of Iden Blue. It's not the video I did on Iden Blue. I definitely think that this deck has the potential to come around. I think it's figuring out what cards make sense based on, you know, the decks that you have to beat, like Sabine and Boba Yellow. I could see, you know, Restock and Search Your Feelings being more sideboard cards now. I would even argue that you might need to play Repair. So this is another list that I would say needs some tweaking and time to gel to adjust to things in the meta. I think it has potential though. Chilson's pretty strong in here. You do get Pike. You're still playing Entrenched. I mean, there's definitely potential for this deck. I think this is one that somebody could pilot. You know, the issue with a deck like this, though, of course, is like you have to win the game that you play with it, because the games are going to take really long. Because you're closing things out a little quicker with Snoke into Avenger, but you know, you're really just milling them out is your main win con, and just staying alive and milling them out and then blowing up the board consistently. So, you know, I think you could see a really strong player pilot this to a big finish. with the right 60 cards, but I do think that it's going to be a deck you don't see as much of because of how long the games take and how you really just you have to win. You can't, if you lose game 1, like you're most likely not going to win game 2 because it takes 30 minutes to win a game, or 20 minutes at least. So something to think about, but I do think that this deck has potential to start rising in the format as things gel and it figures out, you know, what the best 60 cards are. But like I said, I wouldn't play the third Snoke. I would add in the top targets. I'd possibly add in repairs and just be like an annoying deck that gains a ton of life consistently and blows the board up at a certain point. But and while removing everything. I mean, I have Fell the Dragon, Vanquish, and Rivals Fall into 3 Super Laser Blasts in this particular version. So yeah, and then Entrenched and Power of the Dark Side and Takedowns as early forms of removal as well as make an opening. So I do think this has potential though. Something to, you know, if you're a good control player, definitely, you know, in the comments let me know where you're at with this list. I haven't come back around to this list, so this list is a little outdated, but Boba Yellow. It's one of my favorite decks to play. It was really strong in set 1. It was really gaining a lot of traction, and then, you know, then we have Darksaber, Poe, and Wrecker, and it's kind of, you know, beating aggro is really difficult with this deck, and that's definitely this deck's weakness. You could play Salacious Crumb in place of ISB Agent. The reason that I hadn't been playing it is because Salacious Crumb's ability only hits ground units, and you are more susceptible in space here. I do have 2 Consortium in here. You could argue that there needs to be a third one just to have as many forms or possible ways to gain life in this deck. You do hold the initiative in here pretty good. The Veers is in here, or 2 copies to help Vader hit the right numbers. The 3 Reinforcement Walker, the 3 Yularen are in here to help you gain life, as well as the Consortium. Like I said, you could cut the ISB Agent. You probably need to, just because you have to gain life, so you probably need to do that. The Moff Tarkin is outdated. That's supposed to be Remnant Reserves now. I just haven't adjusted the list. It's a better way to get cards. It allows us to possibly get the Reinforcement Walker, which is why I didn't like the Moff Tarkin in here before in the sideboard for the control matchups. This deck does have a really strong matchup against like Han, both Han leaders, and then like control matchups with Relentless and Devastator and Ramp. So it's really just got to get past the Sabine Green hump, and I think, you know, I would adjust it to deal with that, and just kind of, you know, I wouldn't get as much variety with the ISB Agent to be able to steal space units, but I think it's worth putting the Crumb in as another green unit for Yularen as well. Same with the 3rd Consortium. I think you kind of have to. I really like the 2 Command in here, although it is 6 cost, as a way to kill a unit, grab a unit back from the discard pile, like a Sentinel, for example. You also probably potentially want to consider the Black Sun Starfighter, but 7th Fleet Defender, you know, still a very strong card. So what I love about this deck is going Vader into Reinforcement Walker into Devastator and playing Sneak Attack. It's just so much fun. This is a fun deck. It has a lot of potential. I could see a really good pilot finding a way to beat aggro and taking this deck to the top, because I do think that it has better matchups against other things. I do think that it would struggle against Hand Disruption, though. And I don't know what kind of answers it would have for that. I don't know if there is a lot of answers for Hand Disruption right now, but yeah, that would be tough. But another strong one. Rey Discard, I think, is kind of the lesser version of the Han Blue deck. I do think, you know, Rey obviously has the ability to pump up its units, and to Rey the leader has the ability to gain life. So there's that. This is a bit of a different list. It's more focused on the units. I like the Devotion. I think that's a possible good sideboard card for Han Blue too, just to gain 2 life with a unit. I'm not sure. I guess Wrecker's okay in this list because you're not really trying to ramp into too many big things. So I could see that still being okay. You know, in Han Blue it doesn't make sense because you're trying to get to the big payoffs. But maybe Wrecker does make sense in Han Blue, because then you can play it a turn earlier and kill the thing and just use Wrecker as a removal spell. So that might be a way to take the Han Blue deck. But another strong deck, very, very similar. The Force Throws, the Pillages, the Daring Raids. A little less removal focused in this particular version. I would probably bring in Fell the Dragons. I would take out Cripple Authority. I'm not sure why that's in this list on the sideboard. I'm not sure I want the Fang Fighters even. I mean, the Fang Fighters are nice for taking out the Dark Saber, I guess. So, I mean, but you have Ketsu Anyo, which is another card that I think needs to be in Han Blue as a way to remove Dark Sabers. So it's a really, you know, I know you can't cheat it in, but it's a really easy way to get rid of a Dark Saber, so it's a solid card that you should consider. But very similar to Han Blue. And then this is Rebel Resources Sabine Yellow deck. I really like this list. I really like Sabine Yellow in general. I just think that the ECL Poe is just such a strong play that it kind of puts this deck on the back burner. I think this deck is better when control is better because of Spark of Rebellion and, you know, just being able to go wide with a lot of these really cheap units. I think it still has potential. I mean, I think he finished in the top 15 or something at Gen Con with it. But again, you know, you gotta be able to beat those top tier decks. I think he probably does okay against Qi'ra Green. I would actually consider playing 3 Pillage in this list. So I think Pillage is just really strong right now. It's just a really hard card to answer to, and like if you get your opponent down to 2 cards in their hand and you hit them with a Pillage, like that's, as long as you're able to stabilize, that's really strong. I mean, one of the advantages here too is that you have the 30 HP base, and you still have the ability to go, you know, really fast with this deck, with going wide with the turncoats, the squadrons, the Sabines, even the Spec Force Soldier. Leia's good tempo card. You have Falcon to push damage. You have Surprise Strike, Sneak Attack, Red 3. You know, you still have a lot of really strong cards. So I definitely think it has potential, and I could see this deck doing well also. I think this is the last deck on the list. This deck is kind of similar to the Palp decks, in my opinion, currently. This is one of my favorite decks from set 1. It was so much fun to play. There was a player that, and this is his list, I think, that finished top 10 with this deck, so I definitely think it has potential. And you see he's playing the Salacious Crumb with the Ground Sentinels, decent amount of removal with Force Choke, Open Fire, and Timely. Timely is a form of removal. Timely works great with Phase Dark Trooper. Into Barrage, and then you have Traitorous, you have Ruthless Raider as a way to push damage against control, and a way to deal with things in aggro. And then your top end is Vader, Reinforcement Walker, Palpatine, Great Dragon, and Devastator, which is crazy. So this is another deck that has potential, but again, I think it's got to be able to beat Sabine consistently. That's going to be its hardest matchup. The 30 HP base is necessary, I think, at this point. Discerning Veteran's a cool card to be able to capture like a Dark Sabered unit, as long as it's a non-leader unit. Force Choke's a great answer for Sabine on the flip turn, and I think that's what gives this deck potential, as well as the Sentinels, especially like Sentinel blocking damage. He does have the 3 cell block card in the sideboard for the aggro matchup, so I'm sure he probably takes out Resupply or even Devastator against them, and brings in Discerning Veteran and Cell Block Guard. So he probably takes out Resupply, Devastator, I guess, or maybe, yeah, I would imagine. But yeah, another fun one, but I do think it's kind of on the fringe right now. I think you really have to get a good grasp on the aggro matchup. So, you know, it's another one I'll be testing out soon to see if I can make it work, to make a video about it and beat aggro consistently. But I do think it's going to be really, really tough. So, but another fun one, potentially could see some play and has the potential to rise to the top. I think there's about 12 decks I listed here that I think are strong decks in the format. I think there's a couple other decks that I didn't mention, like Boba Red, which are basically just racing a deck like Sabine, and then you have, like, you know, the potential to play like 30 units in space, which is cool. I think that deck has potential. I think Han Red has potential. Sabine Red has potential. Anything with aggression's a really strong card right now because it can remove the Dark Sabers and ready a unit or kill a thing with do 4 damage. It's a really good card. You could almost consider playing aggression in some of these more control decks at 6 cost. What was the other one? Kylo Red. That's just like a glass cannon. I mean, you're really just pushing damage, and just hoping that you're able to kill them before they can get to you. Kylo Yellow, I think, is very similar in a lot of ways. A little more tempo cards and a little more space units potentially in that list. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I really think, whatever you're testing, you need to test it out against that Sabine list to make sure you can beat that deck consistently. If you are beating that deck consistently, please let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear what deck you're using, because I really don't want to play Sabine Green myself. And just kind of let me know your thoughts on some of these decks or changes. I know some of these lists aren't completely optimal. I mean, I haven't adjusted some of these lists in a few weeks, but definitely let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys enjoy the video, and y'all have a good one, and peace out.